Hey there, it's Gabriele Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we help kids to talk and help parents understand their kids. And I'm delighted to have Keisha Berry back with us. Keisha, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back.
Keisha is a speech therapist for SpeechKids, but will you tell the good people about your other practice as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, first of all, I'd like to say I absolutely love working with SpeechKids. It's such a wonderful group. I also have a practice in Prince George's County. A big emphasis of our practice is actually working with homeschoolers. So this is my 11th year homeschooling. I have 4 children, and we work with a lot of homeschoolers. Our primary group that we aim to serve is working with a lot of homeschoolers who have decided to homeschool their children with special needs. And this was actually pre-COVID. So now we're really popular.
Yeah.
Suddenly all of a sudden people, have taken an interest by force in many cases in homeschooling. And so, I'm happy we've been there to support families. So it's a combination of therapy and education. So helping, just homeschoolers in general.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen it already, there is the homeschool interview that Keisha and I recorded at the beginning of the pandemic. I haven't watched it in a little while, but I'm guessing there are some nuggets in there that still apply. So check that out as well. Okay. But one of the things that you and I are really passionate about, on both sides of all of the things that we're doing, is play. And so I just asked you before we hit record, I was like, why did we think we needed to talk about play? And you had an excellent answer. So take it away. Why do we need to talk about play, Keisha?
Well, and we mentioned this, I think that adults have forgotten how to play. And in addition to that, play is essential to a young mind. My oldest child, and you learn as you go. So my oldest child is actually 17 and my youngest is 1. My approach with my oldest child was not the same as the approach with my 1-year-old, just because I've learned a bit more. But I think when I first had him, and when you're a mom, you want to make sure your child is prepared for kindergarten, especially in that 0 to 5 age. And so you want to make sure they know their letters and their numbers. And it was the strangest thing when my oldest went to preschool, because he went to a preschool and the preschool said, we don't do anything with pencils and paper. And I just thought that was the wildest thing. Like, how are you preparing these kids for school if they never pick up pencils and paper? And I saw how they prepared the kids for school. They did it through play. And that's how young children learn. And play is really the simple way of describing it, because what it actually is children learn through problem solving, discovering, exploration. That's how language builds. That's how you build those cognitive skills. And you don't get that from worksheets. You can figure out the letter A, from a worksheet, but you're not getting all of those things that are sort of happening in the background in your brain, so to speak, where your student is really, really learning, or your little infant or toddler is really learning how to learn. And I always say this in the homeschool world, that it is important to teach your child how to learn and not what to learn. So that's the difference in my approaches.
Yes.
My oldest, I had a whole basket of what, right? He must know the letters. He must know the numbers. Now with my 1-year-old, it's like, oh my God. Well, how are we going to figure out what this word says?
Oh my God, Keisha, I have full body chills. When Oprah has a thing, she says, tweet. I'm like, tweet that.
No, that's it. That's the key though. That's the nugget. The nugget we could press it now. Right. Yeah. The nugget is teaching your child how to learn and not what to learn. And that is what play does.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm like jumping out of my skin here. Because when we are teaching kids how to learn, then this, for example, the fact that your child, pretend this is a little green pea off of their tray, right? And they're like dropping it. then all of a sudden we are able to plug into that much more easily and not view it as like something silly that's extraneous to their life. It's actually necessary to their life. And then we're going to be figuring out how to drop other things, particularly if we don't want peas on the floor.
Right.
Or we're just going to like drop things and see how they look. Because part of what you said, the exploration piece, and I say this a lot too, which is, 2-year-olds are a little bit like space aliens.
Right.
Certainly anybody who's 2 and under, they don't have a lot of experience here. They don't know how gravity works. They don't know how stuff works. They don't know what they're supposed to do with their toes and their fingers and their mouths, let alone all of the things that we put in front of them.
Yeah.
And so allowing kids to figure that out is what play is. Yeah.
And in therapy, often when we're working on building language, I often tell families, let's create problems, right? Let's create little problems where there's a need to communicate, right? If I put this favorite toy in this lockbox and I know that my 2-year-old or my 1-year-old can't get it out, they're going to have to communicate in some way to come to me, right? And so that all of that pretending like there actually is a problem, that's a form of play. That's why dramatic play is so important. Halloween is not just Halloween. Hang those costumes up. You can be a firefighter one day and, oh no, there's a fire. What should we do? Well, we don't have a hose in here. Well, what else can we use, to collect water? Should we put it in our hands or should we put it in a bucket? Why or why not? So there are lots of opportunities to think through those things, lots of language.
And that's so interesting too. Just even the description of what you were saying, I was like, well, yeah, parents are going to be all overwhelmed by how to do it. And yet, if we keep in mind, it's not the what, it's the how. So the important information there is not actually how we get the water to the fire. It's the discovery of, when we put it in our hands, that's not very much. And so then right, creating those little problems. And then we sort of figure out, is that a solution to this problem or not? Then we get to think about something else. And so if we focus on the how rather than the what, and the what is very much like, this is the fire truck, this is the firefighter, it has this amount of water,
Right. It's your list, right? It's your list that are predetermined. But then what? Another really, really good thing about teaching the how is sometimes when working with families that are trying to teach their children at home, especially over the last 2 years, what families have noticed is that when you teach the how, your children, even the younger ones, become a lot less dependent, right? So a lot less dependent on you to know what to do next, right? Because now you've taught them, okay, well, when I'm done this, how do I figure out what I should be doing next, right? And you don't need to be able to read to follow a schedule. I say this to working families all the time. Pictures are magical, right? If you have a picture of a little book, then a picture of a snack, and then a picture of maybe their favorite teddy, they know I get my book. And, you may have to guide them if you're like on a podcast, like I would be now if my little one, I have like schedules on the tape to the side of my desk and I can just point what you should be doing, and so they will start to learn those things. And, that also goes into how. Schedules are a how, right? Schedules are how do I regulate my emotions to get through this work so that I can get to what I want to do. So all of this is related to creating little learners that have expectations. And in a child, no matter how young they are, I think sometimes we think that we only need to have expectations for older children, but little kids, it makes a ton of difference. Especially, things like, when are we leaving the house? My 1-year-old, it's just shoo, shoo, shoo. And she just yells shoo to you until you get her out of the house. And sometimes I have to remind my husband, I'm like, just talk to her and tell her what needs to happen. Like she'll start to understand and get with the program. But all those things are important.
Well, and it's interesting. So this brings up, we sort of started with play as an activity, but then we've got this nature, this concept of playfulness.
Mhm.
which is another really important piece, right? And so to your point about picture schedules, number one, creating visuals, super important. We can do like 45 minutes on visuals and not having to repeat yourself ad nauseum. But when we use those visuals too, right? And you did it, the thing about what we do, sometimes it feels so natural that I often want to sort of unravel it, right? And point out like the face matters, right? The expression matters. The body language matters. That quality of playfulness matters, because if we are not inviting a child to be in our sphere, then they are not going to feel welcome. They're going to feel shamed, and they're going to go the opposite direction. And I always say, if they can't be good at being good, they're going to get really good at being bad.
Right.
And so if we are coming off as the one who knows everything and you have to learn and this is how it is, that just doesn't play well with the 5 and under set. It actually doesn't play well with anybody, honestly. It's not a way we want to be in the world. And so that, like, you know, I saw you do it. I was like, right, that what do you need to be doing right now? That quality of playfulness is key for kids.
Yeah. And then by the time they're 5, so I have like a kindergartner, right? And I ask a lot of how and what do you think questions, open-ended. What do you think is so important? And so with all of my kids, even my 5-year-old, they have a Google Classroom. It's more for me than it is for them, because at this point, you know, except for the 1-year-old, there are 3 kids who are school age, and so they all have their different schedules. And so before my 5-year-old could read, her schedule was still in writing. And so, for example, if she would get to math and she would say, well, mommy, I don't know what to do next, I can't read it. And I would say, well, you know your letters, and that word starts with a you only have one subject that starts with a sound. What do you think it is? And she's like, math. Right? So it's a way of just helping your child think through, you can figure out things that you don't know. That's what's important, to give them that confidence. But you know, those how and why questions are really, really important. How do you know? What do you think?
I love it. Okay, I'm going to roll it back, because 2 things that you said. One was your kids can figure it out. Sometimes when kids come to us, particularly those with speech and language difficulties, but any child who's a bit of an orchid is going to have these moments where they're feeling overly challenged by their environment. Something is too hard, too much for them. And so we have to be really, we as adults and particularly therapists, but also parents, have to be really mindful of this notion of a just right challenge, right? Yeah. What is a just right level of question for a 2-year-old is a different just right question for a 5-year-old. Right. And so, right. So we want to be really calibrating those according to whatever is a just right challenge for that particular child, so that they're still feeling empowered to be curious and solve problems.
Yeah. And I think what's important about that, because, you know, I mentioned that the majority of the families that we serve are homeschoolers who are children with communication needs. And I often remind families to focus on what your student can do, right? We're not even going to start with what they can't do. That is not helpful to run down the list of can'ts, right? Let's start with what they can do and let's go from there, right? Because maybe your picture schedule is objects, right? Maybe instead of the word math, you need to have, you know, a little picture of pennies and a ruler and a plus sign. And that's math, because your student recognizes what those materials are and knows that that's something that he or she needs to go get, and that's what's next. So absolutely. And you know, you mentioned a 2-year-old versus a 5-year-old, but I mean, that could vary, you know, just in terms of what their communication levels are. And so, so yeah, absolutely. But once I can figure out what a child can do, we can help families shape them into still being little independent learners. They can do something. Yeah. Right. They can actually probably do a lot. You know, they have a way of communicating, likely. It may not be ideal, which is why you reach out and try to find a speech and language pathologist to help you out. But children often have a very effective system of communication.
Oh, heck. Even if it's screaming, right? We think screaming is like super terrible. Screaming is actually very effective.
Extremely effective. You get an immediate response, you get everybody's attention. But that takes us back to, but play is how you shape those communication behaviors.
Ooh.
Right?
Yes.
Play is where we go. So, when you start screaming or getting upset, that's the adult's opportunity to kind of model, oh, I think you want, and then you help, your little one figure out the words or the gestures or whatever means they need to communicate.
Yes. And that I'm a big fan of the big face, right? Big eyes, big mouth, inhale. I use a lot of inhalations. It's a wonder we don't hyperventilate half the time, right? But just drawing that attention to our faces, to our bodies, and then using that as kind of an interrupter for whatever, the behavior is that we're trying to change, and then playfully with this, right? We're doing all of this. The fun part about this job is we get to play all day.
Yeah.
We're doing serious work, right? We are changing brains through play. And so through play and then through playfulness, we get to change neural pathways. We get to change behavior. We get to expand skills repertoire. But if that is not fun for the child, nobody's learning anything. And so part of this, also part of play, is about, I think, keeping kids regulated. And regulation is like a whole other topic that we can talk about another time, right? But in this kind of sweet spot of learning. Yeah. And we stay there through playfulness and in a play-based activity.
And sometimes I think it can be overwhelming, as a parent, when you say, hey, just play with your child. I mean, what does that look like? When do I play? Is this supposed to be like scheduled? I try to encourage families. I want you to think about what you already do and make it count. That's it.
Yes.
Think about what you're already doing and make it count. For example, do you eat? Yes, I eat. Okay, so listen, let's start there. Let's start there. You eat. It's something that you do. I need you to turn this carrot into an airplane. Or, even when you're just and you don't have to play the whole mealtime, maybe just in the beginning, hide the juice behind your child's, behind the high chair, right? And that's when you get that, where is it? Right? Okay. Well, what else do you do? Do you do bath time? See, I love times, especially when my kids are toddlers. I love times when they're naturally confined to a space.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
Time. And Gabrielle, I know you know this because every time I step in for you, I'm like, oh, Gabrielle's doing lunchtime therapy. This is perfect. So, meal times, car seat times. I don't know about bedtime because my kid doesn't stay in the bed.
Yeah. Changing table, diaper changing, if your kid's not freaking out.
Yes. Yep. My husband is actually in early childhood education, and they have a whole process for what changing a diaper should look like. Make eye contact, communicate. You can talk about the feet and the hands, but it's a great thing. And if you, as a mom, could just, and mom or dad, and I know that it's easier said than done, but if you can just try to be cognizant of those times, those moments, even if a diaper change is 5 minutes, that's 5 minutes a day, or 5 minutes a couple times a day.
Yeah.
You can really work on those things. And that's playing. Changing the diaper is playing. So don't create some new sort of space in your life. Just use what you're already doing and make it count.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. One of the things that we sometimes have families do as well, once they've established sort of playfulness in those routines, is then I have had families set a timer for 5 minutes where they're just sitting on the floor, watching, not playing with necessarily, because grownups get a little bit in the weeds about what it means to play with a child.
Right.
They think they have to like construct this elaborate sort of scenario, and it has to be real because we have to be teaching and we tell all the things. And again, that's getting back to the what, rather than setting a timer for 5 minutes, putting your phone away, leaving everything that needs to be done out of this little bubble, and then just watching and seeing what your child is doing.
Yeah.
And getting really good at figuring out what is enjoyable to them. What are they learning? Are they, again, got my little handy dandy nose ball here. Are they just dropping the stuff? Are they rolling something? And then maybe after a few minutes, do you want to roll something? And so joining your child and creating these non-contingent time-in times, play times, is another thing that I've had families do.
Yeah. And believe it or not, when you do something like that, that's actually a infant version of a leadership. But I mean, that's a leadership activity, right?
Yes.
You're watching what they're doing and you're allowing them to lead you in the play, which is another form of problem solving. There's lots of opportunity for social communication. And so I think you made a good point, though. If there was anything that I could encourage families to do, and even myself, I have to remind myself, it's put your phone away for 5 minutes. Do you know how hard that is? That's so hard. Oh. It's so hard to do. We talk about screen time for kids, and we do our best.
We should be talking about screen time for adults.
Exactly. Every Sunday I get the report, your screen time has increased by like 2 hours. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. It's true. I think it is, if we could like end on, one thing, put the phone away while you're doing it.
Absolutely.
While you're in the car, while you're in the diaper change, while you're in the play space, during meal times. We have a rule at our house: no phones at the table. And actually last night my daughter got on us because the boys in our house were, my son and my husband were looking something up from a previous conversation. And she was like, there are no phones at the table. What is your problem? And this is my 15-year-old. Okay. Yeah. So I was giving myself a good job for that one, but having those, being cognizant of uninterrupted playtime, because guess what? That playtime becomes conversation time later.
Yes.
That's how we learn those social skills, social graces, conversation skills, all that stuff, and how we are in relationship with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, we're going to put our phones away.
Yes.
And we're going to wrap it there. Keisha, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you. Thank you.